Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. This week, to follow the theme of Heart Day, we're talking about the Pharaoh's heart in Exodus. Actually, I wanted to do this video anyway. I just got lucky that it happens to fall on the week that Valentine's Day also sits. Yeah. What's up, everybody? I'm Josh, and welcome to Christian Sophistry, taking apologetics to the next level. And if you're interested in engaging in this conversation, go ahead and think about hitting that subscribe button down below and the bell notification so you don't miss anything. So this week's video is dedicated to a close friend of mine who keeps saying that the hardening of the Pharaoh's heart is God forcing the Pharaoh to resist him. At least that's what I get from him, but it definitely is one of the criticisms that a lot of critics against religion have against this section of scripture. Now, I'm not gonna make offensive arguments against this position. Actually, I'm just gonna list a bunch of different interpretations of this text that I think are both more consistent and more likely. But first, let's jump into some background. So this narrative takes place in Egypt, and I think Exodus 5 through 10, somewhere around that section. The Israelites had been taken captive and held as slaves in Egypt under the Pharaoh. And you might ask, which Pharaoh are we talking about here? And the answer is that the text doesn't actually say, and a lot of biblical scholars think that this is an intentional move just to demonstrate the general attitude of the leadership in Egypt. Of that time. And I think most of us are familiar with the general narrative that takes place here, whether it's from the Bible or for a different reason. But the biblical text is where the real issue arises from. So when the Pharaoh resists Moses' request to free the Israelite slaves from Egypt, up until after the 6th plague is when it says that the Pharaoh hardens his own heart. I think that happens like 10 times in the Bible, and then after that point, it says that God hardens the Pharaoh's heart. And this raises a big issue for both critics and Christians, because a lot of us think that it suggests that God forced the Pharaoh to sin against God, and that he's being punished for it, and that doesn't seem very fair. But because the Pharaoh resists Moses' request, which he speaks on behalf of God, so really it's God's request, he punishes the Pharaoh with a series of plagues. And the modern theory is that these plagues reflect the various gods that are believed in Egypt in order to demonstrate that he is God and not the other gods that are believed in Egypt. So the two questions that we're left with is, how do we define harden, and how does God harden hearts? And to answer these questions, we're going to go ahead and look at a number of different theories on how we understand these verses. The first theory is the figurative language theory. What I was taught in my Old Testament class is that the word harden can also be translated to mean heavy. According to this theory, the hardening of the Pharaoh's heart is a reference to the Egyptian belief that immoral behavior or unethical behavior makes your heart heavier and tips the scales in the balance of good and evil. If the heart is heavier than the good deeds at the end of your life, then you just don't make the cut into the afterlife. So the text is meant to demonstrate that even according to the Pharaoh's own worldview, that he is being immoral. Now, what I do like about this theory is that it supports the concept of complex literature coming out of ancient times. But Paul's reference to this narrative in the book of Romans, to the whole hardening thing, does kind of demonstrate that it has something to do with choice, but the theory is still interesting to think about. The next theory is the inevitability theory. This theory, quite simply, just suggests that the Pharaoh's will was not changed in any way, shape, or form. In Exodus 3:19, God says, "I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go." So the definitions of the criticism are used the same way in this theory of interpreting the passage, but no matter which way you understand the mechanism by which God hardens the Pharaoh's heart, regardless of what happens, his will was not changed. He would have done the same thing one way or another. The next theory is the assistance theory. Another translation of the word harden is strengthen. This theory suggests that God is helping the Pharaoh to make the decision that he would have made anyway. So instead of changing his mind, actually he's sort of like separating the emotion from the choice that he would be making. So instead of causing the Pharaoh's heart to resist, instead he's strengthening the Pharaoh's heart to help him make a decision. Meh. Lastly is the patience theory. Now, this theory sticks with the definition of hardening to mean resistance, but it plays with the mechanism by which the hardening takes place. Advocates of this theory suggest that the Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God's persistent resolve to give the Pharaoh a peaceful opportunity to do the right thing. Every time he resists, he knows that a plague will happen, and then Moses comes back and says, hey, let my people go, and then he refuses and he hardens his heart. So when God hardens the Pharaoh's heart in this passage, the mechanism is not forcing the Pharaoh to resist God. Instead, God is forcing the Pharaoh to see his pride in holding on to the concept that the Pharaoh is in control and that the Pharaoh can, control everything and that he is essentially God. And he's holding on to that because he is resisting the peaceful solution that God offers him. So those are just a few of the theories that I was able to find in the past hour of doing some research on this topic. But I want to know what some of your theories are, so go ahead and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think about this passage. But otherwise, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, I hope to see you next week, and thanks for arguing with me.